Have you ever heard of a protest so powerful it brought an entire colonial administration to its knees, led not by soldiers with guns, but by thousands of ordinary market women? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the incredible true story of the ABA Women's Riot of 1929, a pivotal moment in African history that is too often overlooked. Get ready, because today we diving deep into the story of how thousands of Nigerian women stood up and said, "Enough is enough." The year is 1929. The place, southeastern Nigeria, in the towns of Aba, Owerri, and Calabar. British colonial rule has been in place for decades, and its grip is tightening. The British implemented a system called indirect rule, where they appointed local men, known as Warrant Chiefs, to govern on their behalf. But there was a huge problem. These Warrant Chiefs were often corrupt and had no traditional authority. In Igbo and Ibibio societies, women held significant political and economic power. They had their own networks, market associations, and systems for resolving disputes. The British, coming from a patriarchal society, completely ignored this. They imposed their own system, sidelining women and disrupting the social balance that had existed for centuries. Life under colonial rule was tough. Men were already being taxed, a concept that was completely foreign and deeply resented. People were forced into labor, and the Warrant Chiefs were squeezing every last penny out of them with arbitrary fees and fines. The markets, the economic heart of the community and the domain of the women, were being heavily regulated and taxed. The tension was palpable. It felt like a pressure cooker, and it was about to explode. The spark that lit the flame came from a simple rumor. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. The British were planning to start taxing women. For the women who were already shouldering the economic burden of their families while their husbands struggled with colonial demands, this was the last straw. Taxing them wasn't just an economic attack. It was an insult, a direct assault on their role and dignity in society. The story goes that in the town of Oloko, a warrant chief named Okugo, acting on the orders of his British superiors, sent his representative, Mark Emerua, to conduct a census. This wasn't just counting people. He was counting women, their children, and their livestock, everything they owned. When Emerua arrived at the compound of a woman named Nwanyurua, he confronted her and demanded to know the details of her household. Nwanyurua, a spirited and respected elder, was having none of it. She famously replied, "Was your widowed mother counted?" This wasn't just a witty comeback. It was a profound cultural statement. She was challenging his authority and the very idea that women, especially widows, should be subjected to this kind of humiliation. A heated argument erupted. Nwanyurua, furious, went straight to the town square and consulted with the other women. This is where the traditional power of Igbo women kicked in. They used a practice called sitting on a man. This wasn't a literal act. It was a powerful form of collective protest where women would gather at a man's compound, singing songs of grievance and dancing, essentially shaming him publicly until he repented or changed his ways. It was their traditional court, their way of enforcing social justice. The women of Oloko decided to sit on Warrant Chief Okugo. Word spread from village to village, carried through the market networks. Thousands of women, united by their anger and a shared sense of injustice, descended upon Okugo's compound. They chanted, they danced, and they demanded his removal. The protest was so effective that Okugo was forced to flee. The women, feeling empowered, then marched to the local district office to protest to the British authorities. What started with one woman's defiance quickly became a massive movement. From Oloko, the protests spread to Aba, a major commercial center. The women weren't just a disorganized mob. They were highly organized, using their market networks to communicate and coordinate. They brandished palm fronds, a traditional symbol of protest, and their faces were often marked with charcoal. Their demands were clear: an end to the taxation of women, the removal of the corrupt warrant chiefs, and a return to their traditional systems of governance. The British were completely caught off guard. They had fundamentally misunderstood the societies they were ruling. They saw the women as primitive and hysterical, unable to grasp the concept of an organized, political protest led by women. They couldn't believe that these market women could orchestrate such a large-scale movement without men pulling the strings behind the scenes. This colonial arrogance would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. In ABA, the protests escalated. The women targeted symbols of colonial oppression, the native courts, the Warrant Chiefs' homes, and European-owned factories. They broke into the Barclays Bank and a prison, freeing the inmates. It's crucial to understand that their primary goal wasn't random destruction. They were strategically dismantling the infrastructure of colonial rule. They called it the Women's War, or Ogu Umanwani in the Igbo language. This wasn't a riot, as the British dismissively labeled it. It was a full-blown war against an unjust system. The colonial administration responded with force. They sent in police and troops. In one tragic incident in Calabar, a British officer, Captain Graham, ordered his troops to fire into a crowd of dancing and singing women, resulting in numerous casualties. Across the region, it's estimated that over 50 women were killed and many more were injured. Despite the violence, the women did not back down easily. Their courage was astonishing. They faced down armed soldiers with nothing but their solidarity and the conviction that their cause was just. They were fighting for their livelihoods, their culture, and their future. In the end, the sheer scale of the protest and the tragic loss of life forced the British to act. They were shaken. They launched a commission of inquiry to understand what had gone so wrong. The findings were a damning indictment of their own policies. The commission admitted that the system of warrant chiefs was deeply flawed and that attempting to tax women without understanding their societal role was a massive blunder. The immediate aftermath was a victory for the women. The plan to tax them was abandoned. Many of the corrupt warrant chiefs were forced to resign. Most importantly, the British were compelled to reform their administrative system, leading to the inclusion of women in the native administration for the first time. It was a radical shift, born from the women's fierce resistance. The ABA Women's War of 1929 is one of the most significant anti-colonial revolts in African history. It demonstrates the immense power of collective action and grassroots organizing. These women, without formal education or modern weapons, challenged a global empire and won. They used their traditional communication networks and protest methods with devastating effect. Their legacy is profound. They inspired future generations of Nigerian activists and nationalists in the fight for independence, which would come 3 decades later. The story of Nwanyiruwa and the thousands of women who joined her is a powerful reminder that history is not just made by powerful men in war rooms, but also by ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice. It's a testament to the courage, intelligence, and political savvy of African women. So why isn't this story more widely known? The British colonial authorities labeled it a riot to downplay its political significance and portray the women as irrational. For too long, history has been written by the victors and often by men. But it's time we reclaim these stories. The ABA Women's War is not just Nigerian history or African history, it's world history. It's a lesson in the power of solidarity and the unbreakable spirit of those who fight for justice. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the incredible story of the ABA Women's Riot. I hope it inspires you as much as it inspires me. If you found this video enlightening, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the hidden corners of history. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to see covered. Thanks for watching and see you next time.